The history of philosophy is the systematic study of the development of philosophical thought. It focuses on philosophy as rational inquiry based on argumentation, but some theorists also include myth, religious traditions, and proverbial lore. Western philosophy originated with an inquiry into the fundamental nature of the cosmos in ancient Greece. Subsequent philosophical developments covered a wide range of topics, including the nature of reality and the mind, how people should act, and how to arrive at knowledge. The medieval period was focused more on theology. The Renaissance period saw a renewed interest in ancient Greek philosophy and the emergence of humanism. The modern period was characterized by an increased focus on how philosophical and scientific knowledge is created. Its new ideas were used during the Enlightenment period to challenge traditional authorities. Influential developments in the 19th and 20th centuries included German idealism, pragmatism, positivism, formal logic, linguistic analysis, phenomenology, existentialism, and postmodernism. Arabic-Persian philosophy was strongly influenced by ancient Greek philosophers. It had its peak period during the Islamic Golden Age. One of its key topics was the relation between reason and revelation as two compatible ways of arriving at the truth. Avicenna developed a comprehensive philosophical system that synthesized Islamic faith and Greek philosophy. After the Islamic Golden Age, the influence of philosophical inquiry waned, partly due to Al-Ghazali's critique of philosophy. In the 17th century, Mulla Sadra developed a metaphysical system based on mysticism. Islamic modernism emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries as an attempt to reconcile traditional Islamic doctrines with modernity. Indian philosophy is characterized by its combined interest in the nature of reality, the ways of arriving at knowledge, and the spiritual question of how to reach enlightenment. Its roots are in the religious scriptures known as the Vedas. Subsequent Indian philosophy is often divided into orthodox schools, which are closely associated with the teachings of the Vedas, and heterodox schools, like Buddhism and Jainism. Influential schools based on them include the Hindu schools of Advaita Vedanta and Navya Nyaya, as well as the Buddhist schools of Madhyamaka and Yogacara. In the modern period, the exchange between Indian and Western thought led various Indian philosophers to develop comprehensive systems. They aimed to unite and harmonize diverse philosophical and religious schools of thought. Central topics in Chinese philosophy were right social conduct, government, and self-cultivation. In early Chinese philosophy, Confucianism explored moral virtues and how they lead to harmony in society, while Taoism focused on the relation between humans and nature. Later developments include the introduction and transformation of Buddhist teachings and the emergence of the schools of Xuanxue and Neo-Confucianism. The modern period in Chinese philosophy was characterized by its encounter with Western philosophy, specifically with Marxism. Other influential traditions in the history of philosophy were Japanese philosophy, Latin American philosophy, and African philosophy. The first period of ancient Greek philosophy is known as pre-Socratic philosophy, which lasted until about the mid-4th century BCE. Studying pre-Socratic philosophy can be challenging because many of the original texts have only survived in fragments and often have to be reconstructed based on quotations found in later works. A key innovation of pre-Socratic philosophy was its attempt to provide rational explanations for the cosmos as a whole. This approach contrasted with the prevailing Greek mythology, which offered theological interpretations, such as the myth of Uranus and Gaia, to emphasize the roles of gods and goddesses who continued to be worshipped even as Greek philosophy evolved. The pre-Socratic philosophers were among the first to challenge traditional Greek theology, seeking instead to provide empirical theories to explain how the world came into being and why it functions as it does. Thales, circa 624 to 545 BCE, often regarded as the first philosopher, sought to describe the cosmos in terms of a first principle, or arche. He identified water as this primal source of all things. Anaximander, circa 610 to 545 BCE, proposed a more abstract explanation, suggesting that the eternal substance responsible for the world's creation lies beyond human perception. He referred to this arc as the apeiron, meaning the boundless. Heraclitus, circa 540 to 480 BCE, viewed the world as being in a state of constant flux, stating that one cannot step into the same river twice. He also emphasized the role of logos, which he saw as an underlying order governing both the inner self and the external world. In contrast, Parmenides, circa 515 to 450 BCE, argued that true reality is unchanging, eternal, and indivisible. His student Zeno of Elea, circa 490 to 430 BCE, formulated several paradoxes to support this idea, asserting that motion and change are illusions, as illustrated by his paradox of Achilles and the tortoise. Another significant theory from this period was the atomism of Democritus, circa 460 to 370 BCE, who posited that reality is composed of indivisible particles called atoms. Other notable pre-Socratic philosophers include Anaximenes, Pythagoras, Xenophanes, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, Leucippus, and the Sophists, such as Protagoras and Gorgias. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle edit the Philosophy of Socrates, 469 to 399 BCE, and Plato, 427 to 347 BCE, built on pre-Socratic philosophy, but also introduced significant changes in focus and methodology. Socrates did not write anything himself, and his influence is largely due to the impact he made on his contemporaries, particularly through his approach to philosophical inquiry. This method, often conducted in the form of Socratic dialogues, begins with simple questions to explore a topic and critically reflect on underlying ideas and assumptions. Unlike the pre-Socratics, Socrates was less concerned with metaphysical theories and more focused on moral philosophy. Many of his dialogues explore the question of what it means to lead a good life by examining virtues such as justice, courage, and wisdom. Despite being regarded as a great teacher of ethics, Socrates did not advocate specific moral doctrines. Instead, he aimed to prompt his audience to think for themselves and recognize their own ignorance. Most of what is known about Socrates comes from the writings of his student Plato. Plato's works are presented in the form of dialogues between various philosophers, making it difficult to determine which ideas are Socrates and which are Plato's own theories. Plato's theory of forms asserts that the true nature of reality is found in abstract and eternal forms or ideas, such as the forms of beauty, justice, and goodness. The physical and changeable world of the senses, according to Plato, is merely an imperfect copy of these forms. The theory of forms has had a lasting influence on subsequent views of metaphysics and epistemology. Plato is also considered a pioneer in the field of psychology. He divided the soul into three faculties: reason, spirit, and desire, each responsible for different mental phenomena and interacting in various ways. Plato also made contributions to ethics and political philosophy. Additionally, Plato founded the Academy, which is often considered the first institution of higher education. Aristotle, 384 to 322 BCE, who began as a student at Plato's Academy, became a systematic philosopher whose teachings were transcribed into treatises on various subjects, including the philosophy of nature, metaphysics, logic, and ethics. Aristotle introduced many technical terms in these fields that are still used today. While he accepted Plato's distinction between form and matter, he rejected the idea that forms could exist independently of matter, arguing instead that forms and matter are interdependent. This debate became central to the problem of universals, which was discussed by many subsequent philosophers. In metaphysics, Aristotle presented a set of basic categories of being as a framework for classifying and analyzing different aspects of existence. He also introduced the concept of the four causes to explain why change and movement occur in nature. According to his teleological cause, for example, everything in nature has a purpose or goal toward which it moves. Aristotle's ethical theory emphasizes that leading a good life involves cultivating virtues to achieve eudaimonia, or human flourishing. In logic, Aristotle codified rules for correct inferences, laying the foundation for formal logic that would influence philosophy for centuries. Hellenistic and Roman edit after Aristotle. Ancient philosophy saw the rise of broader philosophical movements, such as Epicureanism, Stoicism, and Skepticism, which are collectively known as the Hellenistic schools of thought. These movements primarily focused on fields like ethics, physics, logic, and epistemology. This period began with the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE and had its main influence until the end of the Roman Republic in 31 BCE. The Epicureans built upon and refined Democritus's idea that nature is composed of indivisible atoms. In ethics, they viewed pleasure as the highest good, but rejected the notion that luxury and indulgence in sensory pleasures lead to long-term happiness. Instead, they advocated a nuanced form of hedonism, where a simple life characterized by tranquility was the best way to achieve happiness. The Stoics rejected this hedonistic outlook, arguing that desires and aversions are obstacles to living in accordance with reason and virtue. To overcome these desires, they advocated self-mastery and an attitude of indifference. The skeptics focused on how judgments and opinions impact well-being. They argued that dogmatic beliefs lead to emotional disturbances and recommended that people suspend judgments on matters where certainty is unattainable. Some skeptics went further, claiming that this suspension of judgment should apply to all beliefs, suggesting that any form of knowledge is impossible. The school of Neoplatonism, which emerged in the later part of the ancient period, began in the 3rd century CE and reached its peak by the 6th century CE. Neoplatonism inherited many ideas from Plato and Aristotle, transforming them in creative ways. Its central doctrine posits a transcendent and ineffable entity responsible for all existence, referred to as the One, or the Good. From the One emerges the intellect, which contemplates the One, and this in turn gives rise to the soul, which generates the material world. Influential Neoplatonists include Plotinus, 204 to 270 CE, and his student Porphyry, 234 to 305 CE.